Mall Santas of Reddit. What is the most disturbing, heart-wrenching, or weirdest thing a child has asked you for? Story 1. I worked in a toy shop for a couple of years, and as you can imagine, Christmas was an incredibly intense time for all of us there. It was impossible to land that job without being an enthusiast to the core. Most of the staff were entertainers or had backgrounds in performance, and we truly lived the dream job. We got to play with toys, joke around with kids, and soak in the Christmas magic. A toy shop at Christmas has a unique, almost magical atmosphere, especially when the staff fully embrace the spirit. Our store took Christmas very seriously, so much so that our t-shirts even proudly displayed phrases like "Assistance to Santa" or "Santa's personal staff" in bold writing across the back. This naturally led to countless charming interactions with kids asking if we had met Santa personally. As the only staff member with years of experience working with children, these questions usually fell to me. I always had a ready response, and it was a joy to watch the kids' faces light up with curiosity and wonder. One quiet weekday, during a brief lull when the other staff members were restocking after the afternoon rush, I found myself alone on the shop floor. A little boy, perhaps around 6 years old, entered and gave me a shy smile before wandering about the store. I gave him a couple of minutes to browse before approaching with an offer to try out a new air-powered rocket launcher. He politely declined and said, "No thanks. I'm looking for my mom's present." I found this unusually thoughtful for a child and immediately felt a mix of admiration and curiosity. I didn't know much about the toys that might suit his mother, so I showed him a selection of general gifts that I thought a typical mom might enjoy. As he browsed, his eyes landed on a massage slipper. A single slipper you slip both feet into that has multiple massage settings. I told him it cost £15, and instantly his shoulders slumped, his excitement fading. Trying to maintain a friendly tone, I asked, "Is that a bit too much?" He nodded silently. I continued to show him a few other options while he explained that his mother was quite unwell, with stomach troubles and constant fatigue. When I asked how much money he had, he whispered, £13. I thought about asking my manager to give him 10% off while I covered the remaining 50 pence. As he continued browsing near the back of the store, a man in his 30s rushed in, searching. He pointed toward the boy and asked if that was him. I began explaining the situation with the massage slipper, but the man suddenly started crying. I had dealt with crying children and frustrated adults, but a crying adult was a new experience. I asked him what was wrong, and through tears he simply said, "I bloody love that boy." At this exact moment, my manager walked out of the staff room and saw me standing with this crying man, so of course, he came over to investigate. The man seemed to pull himself together after what was clearly a rare moment of vulnerability, while I explained everything up until now, and he took over. He said, "His mother is very unwell. She has bowel cancer and has been in the hospital for a few months. The financial strain has been significant, so things like pocket money have been very tight. He receives £1 a week." That meant this little boy had been saving for 13 weeks, not for his favorite toy, not for sweets, not for a game, but for his mum. That level of forethought is incredibly unusual for a child that age, and he had not only made this decision independently, but he had kept it secret from his father and followed through with it for 3 months. My manager, normally a stoic man, was visibly moved by this. How could anyone not be? And simply stood there in stunned silence. His father continued asking me what his son had been looking for, and I explained the situation with the massage slipper. The father then told me he had already purchased all the presents and that his son needn't worry. At this point, my manager knelt and spoke to the boy directly. He asked the child what he would like for Christmas if he could choose anything in the store for himself. After a little encouragement, the boy pointed to a large Lego pirate ship. My manager went to the front of the store, placed it in a bag, and told the boy that Santa had already arranged all of his presents, but this was an extra special early gift just for him. He then handed the massage slipper to the father with a gentle smile, saying, "Give your wife my regards. I hope she gets better," before quietly disappearing back into the office. A stunned silence followed, broken only by the boy's simple, hesitant question. "We can't afford these, can we?" I knelt to him and said, "Well, it would be a rubbish present if you had to pay for it, wouldn't it?" The boy's face lit up instantly. The father reached for his wallet, saying, "At least let me pay for the slipper." And I calmly responded, "Sorry, sir, the tills are all closed." He seemed a little confused, so I repeated, "I'm sorry, sir, the tills are all closed. Merry Christmas." The father smiled like I had never seen a human smile before, and together they walked out with the boy clutching his new Lego set. It remains to this day my most cherished memory, an experience that proves children can be remarkably thoughtful and generous, and a reminder that Christmas is magical, whether or not you believe in Santa. An incredible child broke the hearts of my manager and me, and in return, we gave him a very special Christmas gift that captured the spirit of the season. Story 2. Christmas at my house has always been the most wonderful, magical time I can imagine. My mom and dad, though he has moved out now, are proper hippies, and I grew up attending folk festivals and fairy gatherings, running around the woods, building little homes for gnomes, and experiencing every holiday with a sense of enchantment. Every Christmas was made as magical as humanly possible, filled with rituals and wonder that shaped my childhood and made it feel like a world apart from the ordinary. We have a set of ceramic gnomes that appear every December. My brother and I genuinely believed they lived in Norway and traveled all the way to visit us each year. We only started decorating the house once the gnomes had arrived to watch over Christmas for us. The porridge is left for the Nisa, a Nordic brownie-type guardian of the home. And to thank it, we would make porridge with a generous glob of butter and leave it on the doorstep, knowing it would be gone by morning. Wine is always left for Father Christmas, except for the one year I panicked about Santa potentially drunk driving, and we left grape juice instead. On Christmas Eve, we made homemade mince pies, and of course, carrots were left out for the reindeer. By morning, a few crumbs and a little letter would remain on the plate, evidence that magic had visited overnight. Have you ever read Tolkien's Letters from Father Christmas? It is a compilation of letters J.R.R. Tolkien wrote to his children from Santa. My brother and I had the audiobook growing up, and my parents would craft letters in the same style, using the same characters, so it felt as if the very same Santa who had corresponded with Tolkien's kids decades ago was visiting us. My dad even had a special, enormous pair of boots, reserved for leaving huge, sooty footprints all over the living room floor, making the magic feel incredibly tangible. This level of care and creativity extended to every holiday. At Easter, we would find tufts of fluff on the gate, supposedly from where the Easter bunny had gotten stuck, often accompanied by a letter saying hello to his best friend, Willy-Nilly, our guinea pig. Halloween was slightly less frightening since my brother and I were easily scared, but it still involved the folklore of fairies, changelings, and the brief moment in the year when spirits could pass through, rather than being solely about costumes and candy. When we went trick-or-treating, we did it the Scottish way, as my dad is from Edinburgh, performing a short song or play at each house to earn our sweets, which made the experience far more fun and imaginative. We also celebrated other magical moments. Whenever I lost a tooth, I would leave little cakes for the tooth fairy, and by morning, my pillow would be sprinkled with glitter. On May Day, we would watch the sunrise and go out of our way to avoid stepping in fairy rings. And though less whimsical, Guy Fawkes Day was always celebrated by making a guy, with the curious lesson that we were meant to acknowledge rather than perpetually punish him. A teaching I attribute to my magic granddad, which added a subtle, moral layer to our playful celebrations. I apologize for going on a bit of a rant, but in this cynical, you shouldn't lie to your kids era, I tend to keep the details of my childhood to myself, and it seems like it has all bottled up inside. I am incredibly proud of my magical hippie family, and I cannot imagine a better way to grow up. One day, when I have children, I plan to create the same sense of wonder for them. They will have the rest of their lives to face the facts and the cold, hard truths, but I can give them the gift of a childhood brimming with fairies, magic, and imagination. My childhood was a truly magical place, and I have the most amazing parents. Story 3. I wasn't a Santa, but I helped organize a Christmas party for special needs children for 3 years running as part of a charity group. The guy we picked to be Santa was a really well-built, tall skinhead from Kent called Paul. He was a genuinely kind chap, popular with the ladies, had the gift of the gab, and spoke with a Cockney accent, which made him stand out a lot in Belfast where he lived. Anyway, he was chosen to be Santa for the party. He had his doubts, but we were confident that his strong frame and height would make him convincing. All we had to do was give him a little belly, a costume, and he would adopt a deep, booming voice that completely masked his Cockney accent. The day of the party went incredibly well. We had jugglers, magicians, a mini disco, games, food, and of course, a Santa's grotto. Santa's sack was positioned against a false wall with a hidden opening, allowing us to place toys inside without the children seeing. As it was all special needs schools, we had each child's name, and a teacher hid behind the wall to identify each child as they entered. We handpicked each toy for every child, depending on their disability or special needs. We would slip the toy into the sack and whisper the child's name to Paul via an in-ear headphone concealed under his hair and beard. This allowed him to appear all-knowing, leaving the children in complete amazement and adding to the magic of the experience. One child came in who was around 7 or 8, but his disability made him very small in stature, so he appeared to be about 4. He had an oxygen tube under his nose and poor eyesight, with glasses that made his eyes look huge and sad, instantly melting everyone's heart. He entered the grotto. Santa. "Why, hello, Patrick. Nice to see you again." His eyes lit up, and he exclaimed, "Patrick, you know my name. You're the real one." Santa. "Indeed I am. I came here to make sure you are being a good boy. Have you decided what you want for Christmas?" Patrick. "Yes, but it's not a present. I just want to be at home this year for Christmas." I am not afraid to admit my eyes grew very damp. The girls who volunteered that year immediately broke down, but Paul held it together remarkably well. He explained that he couldn't get in the way of the eye doctors who knew best, and he wanted Patrick to be better so he could be home to visit on Christmas Eve, no matter where he was. Paul then reached into the bag and pulled out a cuddly toy duck. Patrick ran around the rest of the day clutching the duck tucked into his jumper, stroking its head and giving it little kisses now and then, beaming a massive smile the entire day. Paul, a 6'2", muscle-bound skinhead and East Ender from London, was later found quietly crying in the charity office after he had gone to get changed. For people asking, in Northern Ireland, sometimes the term skinhead is used as a generic term for anyone with a shaved head who looks intimidating. Paul was very well built and had a shaved head, but was not a white supremacist. Story 4. I used to work overnight shifts at a home for children with autism, brain injuries, and physical brain deformities. We had several homes, and I always volunteered to work on Christmas and Christmas Eve because I didn't have any kids of my own. I wanted to be there for the kids who might otherwise feel alone. That year, there were 5 children in the home I volunteered at, and they had all written letters to Santa and left him milk and cookies. They were worried Santa wouldn't come because I wasn't going to be asleep, and I told them I had spoken to him. I promised that he knew this was a very special case. This group home didn't have much funding for decorations or gifts because of other issues earlier in the year, so I made a plan. One of my buddies came over to help. He was very thin, but wore all red. Not a Santa suit, just red. Together, we spent 7 of the 10 hours of my shift decorating and wrapping gifts, doing everything we could to make it magical. When it was finished, the children were ecstatic to see the decorations and the presents. They refused to open anything until their families arrived, and every family had promised to come visit. Naturally, I stayed off the clock to see it through. These children were teenagers in body, but had the mental capacity of 5 to 10-year-olds. Their joy when they first saw the room was incredible to witness, and it made my heart swell. Then we waited and waited. 3 hours passed before the first phone call came in. Every parent who had promised to visit had an excuse not to come. The children had spent weeks looking forward to this moment, and no one showed. It was crushing. Every time I relive that day, I feel physically ill. The parents of these kids never saw them that Christmas, yet they would have raised holy hell if anything went wrong physically. None of the children were related, and none had a family that truly cared. The weight of that reality was staggering. One of the kids ended up going unalive that year. As much as we tried, we couldn't watch them 24 hours a day. His parents tried to sue the company but dropped the suit when they were handed the note. It was poorly spelled, but it basically read, "Mom and Dad don't love me. Why stay here?" I no longer work there because for every child that restored my faith in humanity, 2 adults completely shattered it. That Christmas remains one of the most heartbreaking experiences of my life. A group of kids waited all day for their parents to show up on Christmas. None did. One child ended up ending themselves, and their simple, heartbreaking wish to be seen and loved was never fulfilled. Story 5. I was an elementary school Santa for 3 years. This experience still haunts me to this day, leaving an imprint on my heart that I will never forget. I had spent a long morning with little tykes, all filled with retail-inspired dreams of shiny new must-have toys, older boys imagining motorized vehicles, and older girls dreaming of cute boys, makeup, and clothes. After a break to feed the reindeer, those costumes are incredibly hot. I returned to a bustling classroom filled with kids engaged in activities and laughter. And then, after another hour of the usual cheerful chaos, I met 2 little children dressed in their Sunday best. Each of them perched on my knee, looked deeply into my eyes, and asked quietly, from the very depths of their hearts, "Please, Santa, I don't want any toys. I don't want anything. I just want my baby sister to get better." In that instant, I knew exactly who they were. Their little sister, age 7, was dying of cancer in the local children's hospital. We had already done a school fundraiser for her and her family. Our scout troop had raked leaves at their house and helped with their Thanksgiving dinner. It took everything I had not to weep. I hugged each child close in turn, gave them their candy cane, and told them that it wasn't up to Santa alone, but I would do my best to put in a good word with the guy upstairs. I reminded them that everyone loved them too, and it was okay to have a little fun for themselves. I promised to do whatever I could to make sure they had some presents. They each smiled faintly in turn and went to hug each other and their grandmother. I could see the smile through the pain in her eyes as she led them to other activities, a quiet strength shining through the sorrow. I called a break to check on Rudolph on the roof and walked as quickly as I could to the teacher's lounge, where I wept quietly for the little girl, her family, and the selfless love of those little children. Then I put on the suit again and returned to my duties with a broken heart, carrying the weight of their wishes. She died 2 days after Christmas. In her memory, we planted a butterfly garden at the school just outside the office window. It is a serene and beautiful place, with a shaded bench and brilliant flowers, where butterflies come each summer to dance, a small but lasting tribute to a life that touched so many. The gold was very sweet. Thank you. Give the love forward, folks. Always remember, sadness shared is sadness reduced, and joy shared is joy increased. Story 6. There were 2 Santas at the mall. Oh man, this reminds me of the one time I was Santa. Not at a mall though. I was working in a bar and restaurant at the time, and there was going to be a huge Santa parade down the main street. My boss wanted someone to dress up as Santa and hand out drink vouchers to the parents, just to drum up some business. Somehow, I got volunteered. There I was in the main square, decked out in full Santa gear, doing my best ho ho ho, handing out booze vouchers to bewildered parents and lollies to wide-eyed kids. I probably looked a little snowed under, being a hospitality worker. It was around 3 p.m. on a Sunday, and my dark circles screamed, "I've seen things," with a mild case of the shakes to match. My Santa disguise wasn't exactly perfect. Some older kids, maybe young teenagers, hung around me asking for lollies and trying to shake my hand. Naturally, I gave them gangster-style shakes. Michael Weston? I am not. Also, I'm as pale as a triangular sandwich, but hey, I worked in hospitality. The younger kids and parents were loving it though, totally buying the magic. Then came a sour-faced old bish on a Segway. She looked like someone had stolen her Christmas spirit and run it over twice. She was livid that there was an unauthorized Santa in the square and decided to confront me, right in front of all the kids. "What are you doing here?" "Oh, ho, ho, I'm just here to give all these good boys and girls some lollies before the parade, ho, ho, ho," I said, channeling my inner Santa. "Well, you have to clear out. The parade will be here any minute, and you can't be here when the other Santa arrives. Otherwise, the kids will—" She trailed off, realizing she'd messed up. But somehow, it was still my fault. Then, an adorable little kid with the tiniest, sweetest voice piped up, "The other Santa? What? Who's the real Santa?" The woman just glared daggers at me. I, on the other hand, threw all the remaining lollies and drink vouchers into the air like a festive superhero, flung my Santa bag over my shoulder, and made a dramatic retreat back to the bar for a Christmas Guinness. And that, my friends, is the story of the time I was Santa. Chaos, confused parents, and a kid questioning the very fabric of Christmas magic, all in a day's work. Story 7. I was deaf Santa for a local church. I was skinny as heck, so it looked completely ridiculous. A mischievous hearing brother of one of the kids nearly ruined it, but I refused to let him. The kids were cute, sweet, and full of joy, and I really wish I had stuck with ASL and didn't have all these piercings so I could do it again. I wasn't a mall Santa, but in my junior year of high school, my ASL 3 teacher, whose class was the first one to start the program with no higher levels yet, asked me and my friend if one of us would be willing to be deaf Santa for a group of children at a nearby church. My friend couldn't, so I said I would. I'm pretty tall and weigh around 150 pounds, so I looked absolutely ridiculous, stuffing the suit with pillows to appear as close to Santa as possible. Seriously, it was completely disproportionate. I could sign fairly well, though my comprehension was a bit slow. No matter, I worked through it. I didn't have to do much. Kids would come up, sit on my lap, and I would ask their name, whether they had been good, the usual. One of the adults would hand me the child's gift, I'd give it to them, snap a quick picture, and move on. Those kids were probably the nicest I've ever met. No one complained or threw a fit. They were just happy to have a Santa who could talk with them and who they could talk to. I almost cried just sitting there with them. I really wish I had stuck to ASL. 3 years later, I can barely remember much of the language. There was one mischievous little fellow, though. He was the brother of one of the kids, and halfway through, he decided to shout, "Hey, Santa!" Being someone who could hear, I instinctively looked up. That little rascal then went around making a huge fuss that Santa's not really deaf, he's fake, blah, blah, blah. That freaked me out a bit, so I quickly told the kids that no, I wasn't deaf, but I had learned sign language because how else would I know who they were, what they wanted, or if they had been naughty or nice if I couldn't communicate with them. That shut the little fellow up, but I still felt pretty bad for messing up my entire deaf Santa persona. All in all, the event went well, and it remains one of the most memorable nights of my life. Story 8. I have been playing Santa for a few years now, and I work at a tree farm with a cozy cabin on the property. The most heart-wrenching story I have is not my own, but from another Santa I work with. There was an older woman in her mid-20s who was mentally handicapped. When she sat on Santa's lap, she became very quiet, and it took him asking her what she wanted for Christmas several times before she finally spoke. She said, "Santa, my mommy is dying, and I need one more year with mommy. Santa, please give mommy one more year." Before he could respond, she threw her arms around him in a tight hug and began crying. Her caretaker, possibly her father, then led her away. The next Christmas, she returned to the farm very excited to see Santa. Her mother had lived for another year, and she sat on Santa's knee and asked for another year, showing that she truly believed in him and had been very good throughout the year. She had been careful to behave well and had come back to Santa again, because she wanted her mommy to live for another year, just like last year. "Santa, just one more year, please. Santa, just one more year." Again, before he could say anything, she hugged him tightly and was then led away by her caretaker. The following year, she came back once more, but it was clear she was deeply upset. She sat on Santa's knee again, looked at him, and began to sob. She said she knew Santa had tried his hardest and did the best he could, but she wished she had asked for 10 years the first time instead of just one. She apologized for being so angry at Santa for letting her mommy die. This Santa looked at her, gave her a long, comforting hug, and said, "My child, your mommy has passed away, but she will live forever in your heart as long as you remember her." She went very quiet, stopped crying, and looked at him. Then she whispered, "I love you, Mommy. I love you, Santa." She hugged him tightly once more before being led away by her caretaker. She has not returned since, but my co-Santa told me that it is moments and people like her that make being Santa so meaningful for him, and why he will never give it up. Story 9. The magic of Christmas doesn't always come from presents or decorations. It can come from the smallest acts of attention and care. I wasn't a mall Santa, but I played Santa over the phone, and one year, that role became far more important than I ever imagined. A local charity partnered with our community theater, which I was part of, to bring a personalized Santa experience to children. Parents filled out questionnaires with their child's name, age, hobbies, and what they were actually getting, so that Santa could tell them personally that their wishes were on the way. Then, the children wrote letters to Santa, which I held while speaking to them. There were 2 teams of us, a man and a woman. The woman played Miss Claus, Santa's secretary, or an elf, and we tried different roles to make it fun. I did this for 2 years after high school, and every minute was a joy. For 2 full weeks leading up to Christmas, we made phone calls from backstage rooms at the theater. My friend's team got a young girl who, after a little get-to-know-you chat and convincing her that yes, he really was Santa, whispered a request that froze the air in the room. She asked if he could make the bogeyman go away. At first, I didn't think much of it, and apparently her parents hadn't either. But my friend, I later learned, had a bogeyman of his own in his past, someone who had come in at night and done horrible things. As he spoke with her, nothing overtly alarming happened, but instinctively, he felt the danger. After finishing the calls that night, he went straight to the police. Their investigation revealed that her bogeyman was actually an uncle who had only been staying with the family for the holidays and had been abusing her. My friend's intuition, patience, and careful listening had saved this young girl from further harm. That year, he became more than a Santa. He became a guardian angel. He only shared the story with me, the 2 women we were working with, and the police. In gratitude and recognition, we chipped in and gave him a silver candy cane charm for a necklace, a reminder of the good he had done. He never wore it, saying it reminded him too much of the past, but I make sure he never forgets. Whenever he feels low, I remind him that he was, and still is, the best Santa ever to a little girl. That Christmas proved that sometimes the most important gifts Santa delivers are safety, care, and hope. Story 10. Christmas has a way of leaving memories that last a lifetime, even when you aren't playing Santa yourself. I never dressed up as Santa, but I have one memory from when I was 7 that still sticks with me. For about a year, there was a small, frail boy at my school named Fred. When you're young, it's hard to understand the suffering of others. But I noticed that Fred came to school every day in the same worn-out shorts, his hair messy, and the other kids loved to make fun of him. I thought he was incredible, though. Like me, he had moved around a lot and had the most amazing stories, telling me about meeting sultans, the Queen of England, and how his dad was always off on some quest to bring something home. As Christmas approached, I asked Fred what his family was doing for the holiday. He said something about his dad being off on another quest and that gremlins had stolen their Christmas decorations. Walking home that day, I remember he looked so sad. He whispered, "Santa can't always find us because we move around so much." The next day, my family went to see Santa. When I sat on his knee and he asked what I wanted, I pulled out a Terry's chocolate orange and a few Christmas tree baubles from my backpack. I told him, "My friend Fred said you can't always find him sometimes, and something stole his decorations. Can you give this to him?" What I didn't know until later, when my mother told me, was that Fred's father had taken the role of mall Santa that year to make some extra money. I remember Santa starting to cry at first, unsure how to accept what I was offering, but after my mom spoke with him, he came over, hugged me, and said, "No gift I can give is as good as the gift of a true friend. I will make sure he gets these." I was overjoyed when Fred returned to school after the break with my Christmas bauble attached to his backpack, proudly showing it off like a little ornament. He ran up to me, his face beaming, and exclaimed, "Santa came." Later, my mother explained the truth of the situation to me. Even now, I hope Fred feels that same joy every Christmas, and that he always knows the magic of friendship, kindness, and being remembered. Story 11. Christmas has a way of creating unforgettable moments, especially when you're sitting in a mall Santa suit, witnessing the magic unfold through a child's eyes. I worked as a mall Santa in high school and experienced every wild story you could imagine. But one moment stands out above the rest. A young boy waited quietly in line with his mother, patiently anticipating his turn to sit on my lap for a picture. As his mother started to follow him up to my chair, he suddenly turned and shouted, "No, Mom, you have to stay back there." I watched her look at him pleadingly, and she reluctantly agreed to keep her distance. I motioned for him to climb up, trying to make sense of the unusual display. He looked to be 8 or 9, older than most, 75% of the children in line. When I finally asked what he wanted for Christmas, his eyes locked onto mine, and he asked with quiet intensity, "If you're real, then aren't you supposed to know?" It hit me immediately. This boy was on the edge of no longer believing, and he had deliberately kept his mother from whispering the gift he hoped for. I fumbled for words, trying to appear calm, when suddenly his mother dropped her shopping bags and began jumping, punching, and kicking the air with excitement, furiously celebrating her son's faith. Shoppers stopped in their tracks, staring at the scene in the middle of the bustling two-story mall. I decided to play along, teasing, "Well, you can't expect me to bring you those Power Rangers if you aren't a good boy and listen to your mother." The boy's eyes widened, his jaw dropped, and before I could react, he buried his head into my foam-padded chest, giving me the warmest, most genuine hug of the entire Christmas season. His mother looked on, astonished, as her overjoyed son ran back to her, explaining with excitement how Santa was real and that he had just proven it for at least another year. It was one of those rare moments that made all the chaos, costumes, and long hours completely worth it. Story 12. I had the chance to volunteer as Santa once, and it remains one of the most heartwarming experiences I've ever had. I live in Japan, and every year there is a program for orphanages where volunteers donate both presents and their time for a Christmas event for the children. For anyone thinking that kids in Japan wouldn't know or care about Santa, you are completely mistaken. Christmas is huge here, and while it is mostly commercial, the classic image of Santa is something every child recognizes. Thanks to Coca-Cola, of course. I had done this a few times before, but one particular day stood out. I was playing with a little boy, around 3 years old, while the other children were busy with games. Later, I slipped away to put on the Santa costume. I grabbed the bag of presents, each labeled with the child's name, and took my place on Santa's chair. The kids' reactions were priceless. I had gone the extra mile, applying a generous layer of ladies' eyelash glue to my face and eyebrows to make the beard and eyebrows stick convincingly. When the first little boy approached, he immediately jumped up and tugged at the beard. It held firm. His eyes went wide, and he started apologizing in timid Japanese. I patted him on the head, told him not to worry, and asked if he wanted to help me. Being the youngest child there, I placed him on my knee and whispered the names of the other children to him. He eagerly jumped up, guiding each child by the hand to receive their gifts. The delight on his face and the joy of helping made it one of the most magical moments I've ever experienced. When it was finally time to leave, the little boy begged me, asking if Santa would come back again. I promised him I would. He smiled, relieved, saying that many times people don't come back. My changing room was filled with tears that day, not from sadness, but from the sheer warmth and innocence of the moment. Story 13. I had been a mall Santa for a few Christmas seasons in high school, and I thought I had seen it all. Kids asking for action figures, dolls, bicycles, and sometimes the strangest mix of toys and treats. But one little boy completely stopped me in my tracks. And to this day, it remains the most heart-wrenching, mind-twisting request I have ever received. He was around 9 years old, slightly taller than most of the children in line, with an intensity in his eyes that made me realize he wasn't just excited, he was testing me. His mother guided him up to my chair, but just as he reached me, he spun around and yelled, "No, Mom, you have to stay back there." She looked at him pleadingly and reluctantly stepped aside, leaving the boy alone with me. I smiled and asked him to sit on my knee, trying to maintain the warmth and magic of Santa. "So, what would you like for Christmas?" I asked cheerfully, expecting the usual response. But then he looked straight into my eyes, his voice quiet, but full of meaning. "If you're real, then aren't you supposed to know?" I froze for a moment. He wasn't asking for a toy. He wasn't asking for candy. He was asking if the magic I represented, the Santa everyone pretended to believe in, was real. He was testing whether the stories and promises he had been told actually held any truth. In that instant, I realized he had already begun to suspect that Santa wasn't real, and he wanted to see if I would acknowledge what he already understood. I had to think fast. I couldn't break the magic entirely, but I also couldn't lie in a way that felt empty. "Well," I said slowly, "I can see a lot of good things about you. I know that you care about others, that you have been honest and thoughtful this year, and that you notice the magic in little moments. That's how I know what's important to bring." His jaw dropped slightly, and I could see him processing every word. He wasn't asking for presents. He was asking for validation, for proof that someone recognized his understanding and honesty. Then his mother, standing behind him, lost patience. She jumped, flailed her arms, and started shouting, trying to restore control over the moment. Shoppers stopped and stared. It could have turned chaotic in an instant, but I kept my focus on the boy, on the truth he wanted to hear, and the magic I had to preserve. Slowly, he leaned into my padded chest, giving the warmest hug I have ever felt in my life. There was no need for words. In that hug, he acknowledged that the magic still existed, that someone saw him for who he was, and that the spirit of Santa wasn't just about toys. It was about being seen, understood, and cared for. When he finally pulled away, he ran back to his mother, shouting, "Santa is real! He really is!" She looked stunned, confused, and overjoyed all at once. I watched him turn back and wave at me with a grin that could light up the entire mall. In that moment, I understood why being Santa was more than a job. It was about touching lives, even when the requests weren't toys or candy. That boy didn't ask for a physical gift. He asked for proof that magic, honesty, and kindness were real. It was heart-wrenching, terrifying, and beautiful all at once. It made me realize that kids notice everything. They see when adults bend the truth, and sometimes they need a small, honest confirmation that the stories we tell them aren't empty. Moments like that are why being Santa is more than putting on a suit and handing out candy canes. It's about validating children's emotions, their understanding of the world, and their trust in the magic that surrounds them. That hug, that one quiet question, stayed with me long after the mall lights dimmed and the Christmas season ended. Looking back, I can confidently say that the weirdest, most disturbing, and heart-wrenching request I ever received as a mall Santa wasn't about a toy or a treat. It was a child asking for the truth in the midst of fantasy and reminding me that the real magic of Christmas lies in recognition, love, and understanding. Even years later, whenever I see a child approach Santa with hesitant eyes, I think of that boy and his quiet question. It reminds me that as a Santa, you can never underestimate the depth of a child's understanding or the power of a single, honest answer given with care. It's moments like that which make all the chaos, long hours, and tired legs worth every second. Story 14. I believed in Santa until about 5th grade. Looking back, I can see that losing that belief hit some kids harder than others. For me, it hurt more than I expected because, despite what other children in school were saying, I wanted to believe in Santa with every ounce of my heart. He had been the one I first called out to when I was lost and alone, around 3 or 4 years old. I remember crying to the sky, "Santa, please save me. Please, Santa." No one came, but I still believed. Maybe it was only for the toys at first, but it was more than that. I loved the idea that he could see us all the time. I never thought of it as creepy. Santa became my imaginary friend, my protector, my constant companion when I had literally no one else. I wanted so desperately to make Santa proud of me. I wanted him to know that I was a good kid, that I tried my best, that I deserved his attention and care. 4th grade hit, and suddenly the world felt harsher. Class was split into 2 groups, the ones who believed, and the ones who actively mocked those of us who did. I tried to protect myself by saying I didn't believe, even though inside, I did. Magic was real to me. Santa was the one who could come to save me from my home, from loneliness, from all the quiet, invisible heartbreaks of childhood. I clung to that belief like it was a lifeline. I believed that if I were good, if I tried my hardest, Santa would notice me, would save me, and maybe even reward me with a little joy along the way. Then came the moment that changed everything. I realized with a sudden and painful clarity that Santa would never come for me because he wasn't real. It was a single, sharp click in my mind, like the sound of a lock shutting for the first time. All of it, Santa, the Tooth Fairy, leprechauns, mermaids, Easter bunnies, dreams coming true, magic itself, was gone. The world I thought was full of wonder and possibility was just the ordinary gray reality of life. In that instant, I felt my childhood shatter. I wanted so desperately for it to be real. I believed in it as completely as I believed in the phone I am typing on now. And just like that, it was destroyed. I didn't just lose belief in Santa. I lost belief in the possibility of magic, in the sense that the world could ever be more than dull, predictable, and disappointing. Adventures, wonders, the feeling that anything could happen. Gone. I felt untethered, as if the foundation of my imagination had crumbled. The life I was left with seemed unbearably boring. I didn't know what to do, who I was supposed to be, or what would even matter anymore. Everything seemed flat and meaningless. That night, lying in bed, the sadness and disillusionment pressed down on me like a weight. And then, by the same logic, I wondered about God. If Santa wasn't real, then who was watching, if anyone? Was there any reason for hope at all? My mind spun in circles, trying to reconcile the world I wanted to be real with the one I was forced to accept. It was overwhelming. I cried quietly, feeling the sharp, unrelenting ache of disappointment, but also a strange, growing emptiness, as if part of my childhood had been taken and I had no say in the matter. I kept thinking about all the things I would never experience. I would never ride a flying sleigh. I would never meet talking animals or go on secret, magical adventures. All of it had been wiped away in a single moment of realization. And the ordinary, everyday life that remained, homework, chores, going to school, washing cars in summer, suddenly felt meaningless. I was adrift in a world that no longer held any wonder. Yet, over time, I began to accept it. I washed cars. I went to school. And I learned the ways of real life. But even now, years later, that first moment of losing Santa still lingers in my chest like a quiet ache. It reminds me how much children need belief, hope, and small miracles, even if those things aren't tangible. Magic, in some sense, is just the feeling that someone sees you, that someone cares, that the world might surprise you with kindness. Losing Santa felt like losing all of that at once. Even now, I sometimes close my eyes and think about that 3-year-old me crying into the night sky, begging for a hero who never arrived. And while I know it was never real, I also know that the longing, the hope, and the love behind that plea were real. Santa wasn't a man in a red suit. Santa was the embodiment of childhood hope, trust, and the desire for connection. Losing that was the first time I truly understood disappointment and the fragility of belief. It was devastating, but it also taught me something about resilience, about the human heart, and about how precious even small moments of magic can be. I wash cars now, and the world is ordinary. But sometimes, when I see children laughing at Christmas, I feel a little spark of the old belief inside me. And for a brief moment, I allow myself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, magic does exist, just a little, and that Santa, in some form, is still watching over us all. Story 15. One of the most unforgettable experiences of my life occurred at a Christmas party for child cancer patients, held at a prominent New York City cancer hospital. The event was organized annually by my ex-girlfriend's company, and I volunteered to help one year. They asked me to dress as Santa and walk around handing out candy canes, small toys, and little gifts to the children. I expected it to be heartwarming, but I had no idea how intense, humbling, and heartbreaking it would be. As soon as I got there in the Santa suit, I was hit with the reality of the room. Kids of all ages were sitting with their parents, some in wheelchairs, others hooked up to medical equipment, and many wearing the visible scars of surgeries that had been part of their short lives. The atmosphere was a mix of excitement and quiet tension, the kind that made your chest ache just from seeing it. I had volunteered before for smaller events, but nothing prepared me for the raw emotional intensity of this one. One child, in particular, stopped me in my tracks. He looked about 4 years old, though he had clearly endured far more than most adults could imagine. His head was covered with scars from multiple surgeries, evidence of the medical battles he had fought. He motioned for me to bend down and whispered into my ear, "All I want for Christmas is to be able to see you again next Christmas." I froze for a moment, overwhelmed. His words were simple, almost childlike, but the weight behind them made me feel like I had been punched in the chest. Tears started pouring down my face without warning. I knew from his parents that he had brain cancer and had undergone over 15 operations in his short life. At that moment, I realized that the smallest gestures mattered more than any grand display of generosity or holiday cheer. This tiny boy had only one wish, and it wasn't a toy or candy. It was connection and hope. I decided then and there to make him my helper for the day. I lifted him onto my shoulders, careful not to hurt him, but letting him feel empowered in this small role. Together, we walked around the room, handing out candy canes and presents to the other children. I could feel his tiny hands gripping mine, trusting me completely. And his giggles, soft but full of joy, made the tears on my face mix with laughter. Every time I looked down, his wide, excited eyes reminded me that he was savoring the moment, despite everything he had endured. At one point, I ran to a nearby Toys R Us during a break and picked out a huge Rudolph stuffed animal. I also went to a nearby makeup studio and had them create a red circle on his chest with permanent makeup, mimicking Rudolph's glowing nose. When I returned, back in my Santa costume, I presented the gift to him and whispered that Rudolph had personally left it for him and had even kissed him on the chest. His face lit up with pure wonder. I have never seen a smile so radiant. The joy radiating from that small, fragile body was indescribable, and I knew in that moment that nothing else mattered. Not exhaustion, not discomfort, not the world outside that hospital. Throughout the day, I carried him around, letting him experience a sense of control and participation that his illness often denied him. He helped me deliver presents, and even though I was crying on and off, he never noticed. He was focused entirely on the magic of the moment, completely absorbed in the wonder that Santa had brought to him and the other children. Parents and volunteers watched, many of them also crying quietly, touched by the purity of the child's happiness. When it was time to leave, his parents came up to me. They were visibly crying, their eyes red and tired, but their gratitude was palpable. They told me that it had been the happiest they had seen their child in over a year. Hearing that from parents whose lives were weighed down by fear, medical appointments, and uncertainty, I understood that my role as Santa that day went far beyond the costume or the gifts. It was about being a vessel for hope, even if just for a few hours, for children who had been dealt challenges no one should face at such a young age. We broke up shortly after that Christmas, and I never saw the little boy again. I don't know if he made it to the next holiday season, but I carry the memory with me every day. That day left a mark on me, one that no other experience could replicate. I went home that night and tried to numb the overwhelming mix of joy, sorrow, and helplessness with a lot of alcohol to blunt the emotional ache. But no substance could erase the memory. It stayed with me, a constant reminder of resilience, innocence, and hope amidst suffering. Since then, I've gone through some of my own dark times, even coming close to ending myself a few times. But when I think back to that little boy, so brave and filled with hope despite everything, it reminds me that my problems, as heavy as they feel, pale in comparison to what he endured. The perspective gained from that day has saved me more than once. I realized that strength isn't measured by wealth, success, or control, but by the ability to face suffering and still hold on to hope and joy. That child's simple wish, to see Santa again, taught me more about the meaning of Christmas than any festive song, decorated tree, or extravagant gift ever could. It was a lesson in empathy, in love, and in the importance of showing up for others, even when life is overwhelmingly difficult. It's easy to forget in our busy adult lives that joy can come from the smallest gestures. But that day, I experienced it in its purest form. Being Santa for that one day, for that one child, was the most humbling, heartbreaking, and ultimately heartwarming experience of my life. I learned that magic doesn't always exist in toys or snow or twinkling lights. It exists in moments of genuine connection, hope, and kindness. And even though the sadness of knowing his life was so fragile weighed heavily on me, I also felt a sense of purpose that I carry with me to this day. I will never forget the tears, the laughter, the tiny hands gripping mine, or the beaming smile of a child who, for just one day, felt joy without fear. That day, I was not just Santa. I was a reminder that hope, love, and compassion are the greatest gifts anyone can give. And that little boy, forever in my memory, continues to teach me the meaning of Christmas every single year. Story 16. Every year, at a long-term care facility, an old-age home where residents depend on the community for a touch of holiday cheer, I volunteer to bring a little Christmas magic, even though I don't play Santa in the traditional mall sense. My connection to the place is deeply personal. My grandmother lived there in her later years, and the staff took incredible care of her. Doctors had initially given her just 1 year to live, but with the compassion and support of the caregivers, she stayed for 4 years, living those extra years with dignity and comfort. During that time, my father, ever devoted, made sure she lacked nothing, and I made it a point to visit her every day. Between jobs, I would do odd part-time work in the dead of night just so I could spend my days at the facility. Unlike some of my extended family members who visited sporadically, I genuinely cared, and my presence was felt. As the months passed, I began to notice something. The residents, particularly those without family nearby, started to talk to me as though I were part of the community. They would share small anecdotes from their youth, comment on the weather, or simply ask about my day. It became clear that family visits were scarce. Most only came during Easter, Christmas, and birthdays. The rest of the year, the hallways were filled with the quiet hum of daily routines, interrupted only by the occasional staff member making rounds. The loneliness in the eyes of some residents hit me harder than anything I had expected. These were people who had lived full lives, contributed to families and communities, and yet, in the winter of their lives, felt forgotten. One evening, as I was tidying up after my visit, I noticed the facility had a small wish list pinned on a bulletin board. Each item was simple, accompanied by a short note from the resident explaining why they wanted it. Some of it was practical, some sentimental, but all of it carried weight. My grandmother had never made any requests. She had always been modest. But seeing the list, I understood that many of the residents had small wishes that, left unmet, underscored the absence of those who should have cared for them. The most common request was warm cotton socks. At first glance, it seemed mundane, almost laughable. Yet the reason behind each request was heartbreaking. "Feet get chilly," they would write. Many residents spent most of their day seated in wheelchairs or armchairs in a facility where the heat never seemed to reach the extremities. No matter how many blankets or warm layers they wore, their feet remained cold. There was no one to fuss over them, no grandchildren to bring thick socks or slippers, just a small note and a hope that someone would notice. That first year, I bought a large bag of black cotton socks and tried to match each request. It seemed like a simple act, but I learned quickly that the names written in Sharpie on the requests didn't show up on the black socks, and several residents never received the exact item they had hoped for. It was a small detail, but it mattered. The experience left a profound mark on me. I realized that volunteering was not just about showing up. It was about paying attention to the details, understanding the little things that could brighten someone's day. That year, I decided I would do better. This Christmas, I planned to pick something different from the wish list, something more visible, something that could be easily personalized. White cotton socks, or something similarly cozy, were at the top of my list. I wanted every resident who asked for them to feel seen, to feel that their small wish mattered. The day I visit the facility is always quiet at first. I arrive early, checking the halls, listening to the soft chatter of residents and staff, and making note of when Christmas dinner will be served. It usually happens a weekend before the holiday itself, so that those who have families nearby can attend their celebrations. I like to arrive unnoticed at first, observing the residents in their natural rhythms, smiling at the familiar faces that have come to know me over the years. One woman, Mrs. L., catches my attention immediately. She sits near the window, her hands wrapped around a teacup, staring out at the winter landscape. Her eyes follow me as I walk past, and when I nod at her, she returns a small smile. I know her wish list request well. Warm, white socks, thick and soft, to keep her toes cozy during the long nights. I place a pair carefully in her locker later, making sure she will see them when she wakes from her afternoon rest. Her smile when she discovers them is the kind of reward that cannot be replicated. It is the kind of joy that goes beyond material value. It is about being remembered, being cared for, being acknowledged. Other residents follow a similar path. Mr. J, an elderly man with arthritis, asks me for a new set of playing cards. He tells me they are for his weekly card games with a small group of friends in the lounge. Without his cards, he says, the games feel incomplete. Mrs. K, a spry woman who enjoys knitting, requests yarn. It is not expensive or fancy, but it is her way of keeping busy and feeling connected to something she loves. Each item on the list carries a story, a memory, a piece of their identity. As the day progresses, I become more than just a volunteer. I become a messenger of warmth, of small comforts, of connection. The wish list transforms from a simple sheet of paper into a bridge between loneliness and companionship, between isolation and community. And when I distribute the items, I see the impact immediately. Residents hug the socks, caress the yarn, shuffle the new cards in their hands, and for a moment, the world outside the facility, with all its indifference, ceases to exist. I cannot overstate the emotional weight of these visits. They remind me of my grandmother, of the care she received, and of the responsibility we all share to look after the elders in our communities. They remind me that Santa, in this context, is not a jolly man in red, but anyone who shows up, who notices, who takes the time to make the world a little warmer, literally and figuratively. By the time the day ends, I am physically tired, but emotionally fulfilled. I leave the facility with a renewed sense of purpose, carrying with me the quiet gratitude and smiles of those who might otherwise have gone unnoticed. And as I reflect on the simple act of fulfilling wishes, black socks that became white, playing cards, yarn, I am reminded that the spirit of Santa is alive in us all, whenever we choose to care. This is the kind of Santa story that never makes the headlines. There are no flashing cameras, no viral videos, no accolades. There is only the quiet, transformative magic of being present for those who need it most, and the understanding that even the smallest gestures, cotton socks on cold feet, a warm smile, a moment of attention, can change a person's day, and, in some cases, their entire Christmas season. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.